Welcome to our podcast, where we talk about the interesting, frustrating, and inspiring experiences we have as people with strongly held religious views working in corporate IT. We're not here to preach or teach you our religion. We're here to explore ways we make our career as IT professionals mesh, or at least not conflict with, our religious life. This is Technically Religious.
This is a continuation of the discussion we started last week. Thank you for coming back to join our conversation. I want to pivot back around, though, just talking about the leaders in our faith community and the behaviors or the examples that they show. I read something last year from Rabbi Sacks, who is the former chief rabbi of London, and it really surprised me because it was a take on a part of the Torah, of the Bible, that I wouldn't have expected, and I didn't see it when I was reading it myself. Rabbi Sacks was talking about when he himself feels depressed and overwhelmed and anxious, and he said that whenever he felt that way, he would recall a point when Moses himself reached his lowest point, and this is, for those people who want to find it, in the book of Numbers, chapter 11, verse 10, or thereabouts, because I know the numbering is not always the same between different versions of the Bible. So the Israelites were engaged in their all-time favorite activity, complaining about the food. In this case, they were recalling fondly the cuisine that they got to have in Egypt, completely forgetting about the fact that they were slaves at the time. That was completely ignored. God is, because of this, understandably angry, but Moses was more than angry. As Rabbi Sacks describes it, he suffers a complete emotional breakdown. And one of the things he says to God is, I cannot carry this whole people on my own. It's too heavy for me. And Rabbi Sacks continues by saying, somehow the knowledge that the greatest Jewish leader of all time had experienced this depth of darkness was empowering. That he took comfort in knowing that everybody sometimes gets there. Everybody experiences this. Even the man who the Bible itself says was the most humble human ever to walk, who did ever or will ever walk the face of the earth. The one human who was righteous enough to speak face to face with God still had crushing depression that he didn't know how to get past himself. And by the way, in this plea to God, I can't do this, God has an answer. God's, by saying, I can't do this, God says, okay, here's how I'm going to help. And that also is empowering. So I just, when we talk about the things that we value in our leaders, I think we'd be remiss to not mention Moses.
Well, and to not mention God, right? Because when we're talking about the ultimate leader, I mean, even Moses at his lowest point turned to God and said, I can't do this. And God's like, okay, let me help you.
Right.
I think that for those who have a religious belief, that is ultimately where they turn to, is to God.
And if I recall correctly, the way God helped him was by telling him to get help. He told him to gather 70 elders and have them help out with his duties. So having spoken about the stigma behind talking about mental health and sort of how we expect our community around us to react, the values that we expect them to have, how do we actually go around treating mental health issues? Is there something that we can take from our religious traditions, our religious communities? Is there something that we can learn from that?
I mean, mental health within Mormonism is something that very recently has started to peak. In fact, Mormonism has a biannual conference. It happens in April and October every single year. They call it the General Conference, and it's broadcast live from Salt Lake City. In the one that just happened in October, there were a number of addresses from leaders of the church around mental health. The church has, and we'll put this in the show notes, actually has a website that's dedicated to mental health, and it outlines a few things that we can do. It talks about, watching what you say. So if you're in a position where someone comes to you and says, hey, Yechiel, this is the challenge I'm having, be careful the things that you respond with, right? Sometimes we just need to listen, and we don't need to fix, which as engineers is really hard because we want to fix everything, because everything can be fixed, right? We also need to be authentic friends. Everyone needs a friend, and when you are suffering from depression, the world feels like a very lonely place. It talks about things like practice self-care, and it goes into details on what it thinks self-care is. It talks about this the be still. Sometimes for me, when I'm in a depressive episode, I do the opposite of be still. I get really busy. The more busy I am, probably the more unstable my mental health is. So if I'm working 12, 13, 15 hours a day, I'm probably trying to run away from something. It talks about finding joy and taking care of our physical selves, which is really important. Those are all things. Now, I will also point out that the reality of Mormonism is this: the state of Utah has the highest percentage of Mormons anywhere in the world. And in a study done, I believe in 2017, it found that LDS women are almost twice as common to have mental health issues than LDS men. 27% of Mormon women and 14.5% of Mormon men were dealing with significant depression. And Utah, again, which is predominantly Mormon, also has the highest incidence of adult mental illness and adults with serious thoughts of suicide in the entire United States. And those are some pretty heavy things when you have such a high population that is focused on mental health. So yes, Mormonism itself is doing a lot of things to start this narrative. And as we talked about before the show started, Canada, among other nations in the world, has done a wonderful thing. There's a company here, it's kind of like your Ma Bell down there in the States, Bell Canada, and they every year they run a campaign called Let's Talk. And that campaign has been super powerful in addressing the stigma around mental health and seeing others who have not only experienced mental health but have been able to navigate the complexities of it. So, religious communities, as I talked before, very complex narrative, very complex system. Some are so much better in dealing with it than others. I think Mormonism is getting better. It still has a ton of work to do.
Speaking from the Jewish community perspective, there's the stigma is still there, like Leon spoke about earlier, but I do believe it's getting better. It's becoming more okay to speak about it. It's becoming more okay to seek help. I mentioned earlier that, some people can see it as a sort of a religious failing, but on the other hand, Judaism also tells you that when you're sick, you should go to a doctor. There's the verse in the Torah that specifically gives permission to doctors to heal. And so realizing that your mental health is just like any other health issue, there's actually a mitzvah, there's a commandment to take care of that. You can't serve God when you're sick in bed. You also can't serve God when you're depressed. So dealing with it is important.
Right. And that verse is, I think it's important to point out that verse is in direct contradiction to the idea that going to a doctor would deny faith in God. That seeking another human to help fix you would say, well, I believe this human is more powerful than, or has somehow more ability or skill than God does. And so this verse comes to say, no, that's not how this world works. This world works on certain, principles, and doctors have an understanding of, the biology and all those things, and that's okay. I put it there for that reason. Yes, you're right. God is the one who is ultimately going to heal you, but in the same way that God is the one who ultimately is going to feed you and ultimately going to make sure you're okay, and yet we still have to do the work of planting seeds and harvesting and all those things because we still have to take part in this world. The same thing with seeing, professionals who can help us out. They are part of the process. I also want to add that this is where we get into the true role of what a rabbi does in Orthodox Jewish synagogue communal life. I think from the outside, people think the rabbi is either the smartest Jew in the room, or the one who leads all the religious things. They lead the service and they read all the important parts. In fact, when you go to an Orthodox service, the rabbi is probably the one who's sitting there doing the least in the service. They're not leading, they're not, any of those things. The rest of the congregation handles that piece. The rabbi is the one who understands each of the congregants on the most personal level. That's what they're there for. They're there to know what somebody is struggling with religiously, and to know if they're struggling with something emotionally or in their health. Because Judaism is so private about things, people don't necessarily broadcast their troubles. The rabbi is the single point of contact in a lot of cases where someone says, yeah, I just got fired from my job and I'm really embarrassed about it. And the rabbi can reach out to somebody else and say, hey, I heard that in your company you're looking for somebody. I happen to know someone who's looking for work, and can be that switchboard operator who can put people in touch. At the same time, the rabbi is the touchstone who says, oh, that thing that you're questioning about your faith, that's normal. Lots of people do that. Or to say, wow, that's really kind of exceptional. Let's work on that. Let's talk about that. Let's see who else we can bring in for that. Whether that is spiritual or emotional or, mental / psychological or just physical health. They're the ones who are there to be the reality check and the sanity check and the trusted advisor. So, I think, Josh, speaking to your point about what do you look for in religious leaders, again, someone who's can be vulnerable can also open themselves up to other people being vulnerable to them. But also, that's their role in the community. And the other point I wanted to make is that, to your point about being still, in Judaism, we pray 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and in the evening. The prayers are not... they're not trivial. They can take anywhere from 45 minutes to, at the very least 15 minutes, depending on what time of day it is. And I think they can be extremely meditative. They offer an opportunity to check in with yourself, whether you want to talk, call it talking to God or checking in with the boss. I don't mean Springsteen, or, checking in, with yourself, whatever it is. If you take the opportunity, prayer can be more than just a litany of, I really need this and I really like that, and can you buy me a pony, and, or, thank you, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful. It can be a moment to say, how am I doing and what feels missing? And Josh, to your point, am I running away from something? Is there something I'm avoiding? What's that all about? So I think that in a Jewish context, there are these opportunities. Not that everyone takes them, not that everyone looks at them that way, but I believe that they're there.
Yeah, honestly, one of the hardest things that I had to do when I transitioned away from Mormonism was rediscover prayer. Once the deity that you knew, when I couldn't define God for me anymore, and that was really hard. So I'm a little curious. I want to go back to your description of the rabbi, because there appears to be such a broad difference between your experience, both of your experiences, with Orthodox Judaism and the role of the rabbi, and that of Mormonism. So tell the listeners a little bit about rabbis. How long do they go to school? What training do they have that allows them to have that role, where you could go to them and say, hey, Rabbi, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with my mental health. How do I work through it?
Yechiel, this one's for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is nothing in the formal training of a rabbi that actually prepares them for that. The actual formal training is like purely the legal aspects of it, like knowing how to, is it kosher or not? What am I allowed to do on Shabbat? What am I not allowed to do? The sort of the legal aspects of the questions that people might ask you. But then, like you said, every rabbi of a congregation has to deal with all these other issues that come up, and that pretty much comes, there is no formal training for that. That you have to pick up. Most rabbis will spend time under, sort of as assistant rabbis, helping out other communities and picking up. And, those are things, these are things you can't quantify. You can't teach them in a classroom. Empathy and relating to people and communication skills, these aren't things that you can teach. You have them or you don't. Obviously, you can perfect them. You can make them better. And someone who will struggle with that will just realize early on that being a rabbi is not for them. So it's sort of a self-selecting role where the most successful rabbis are the ones who are most respected for the reasons that Leon mentioned, because they have this empathy, because they have these people skills, because they have these connecting abilities to bring people together and to really get down to what people are going through.
So a rabbi is not, the role of a rabbi is not assigned. It is something you pursue?
Yes.
Right. I also, before people recoil from their their earbuds and think, oh my gosh, they're completely untrained and they're doing this stuff. The rabbi isn't necessarily one who is going to try to fix these issues, these mental health issues or whatever, but they're in a position where, as Yechiel said, they can listen empathetically, and they can be a sounding board to say, this is not, this isn't typical. This isn't a, I hate to say a normal response, but this isn't a common response to these situations, and let's help find someone to talk to. And rabbis regularly do, recommend people to therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists, to marriage counselors, and to personal counselors as well, and say, let's, they don't try to tackle, in the same way they wouldn't try to tackle a myocardial infarction, heart attack, and say, okay, I can Torah this. Like, no, that's not, they're going to say, this is not good physical health. We're going to call an ambulance now. They also, but people are often more comfortable sharing their mental state with them, and therefore they can be the point to say, as another human listening, you know what? I think we need to get someone else involved. Let's do that.
So, again, we're trying to interweave our religion and our IT communities, and so this role of a rabbi is very interesting to me. I'm wondering if there is an equivalent when we're struggling with mental health in our IT communities. Like, is there, do we have that rabbinical role, or do we have, in the context of Mormonism, do we have that role of bishop or stake president? Which, if you're Catholic, a stake president is like an archbishop. I don't know what the Jewish equivalent of that is, but you don't have one?
There ain't none. There's no organizational structure. That's another misconception, is that there's some, pan-galactic Jewish organization. Forget about the conspiracy theories. There's really, you've never seen anything quite so disorganized until you get into Orthodox Judaism. It's.
But to answer your question about what would be sort of the equivalent role in IT, I think a good manager would recognize if one of their teammates, is taking on too much, seems to be burning out, or seems to just be stretched too thin, or just in general seems to be down, and we'll call them out on it and tell them, take a sick day, take a mental health day. If they see that the problem is persistent, talk to someone. Obviously, the workplace has, I'm lucky to work at a company that values mental health, and and it shows both in the benefits that they offer and the health insurance that they offer, and they offer counseling and things like that. So I think definitely workplaces have have a big role to play in here, and a direct equivalent to the rabbi job, a manager has direct responsibility for their reports.
So I also think that I think we all know that you can have good managers. I think that a whole other podcast or entire podcast series on the types of managers we've had. And yes, Josh, I'm in the middle of reading The Manager's Path, so based on from your recommendation. So the good and bad managers all around. But I also think that mentors, which is much more self-selective, have the opportunity to to be that sounding board. Someone who knows you, who understands what you're going through, who understands that in a professional context, but is able to say, as we said at the top of the show, it's one thing to be a little tired or a little upset or a little frustrated, but when that turns into, long-term exhaustion or rage or anxiety, that's, sort of a tipping point, and a mentor may be the person who's able to say, no, I've seen this, or I've had this, and I can tell you right now, this is, let's do something about it.
Yeah, I've been pretty fortunate to have really good managers for the past 5 years. I mean, that's not to say that my managers in the previous 15 weren't good, or in some cases even great. Leon, you and I shared a manager. Andy was an outstanding individual, still is. He's not changed a bit. He's still outstanding. I've had 2 other managers since Andy transitioned away from our team into another team, both of whom I've been able to talk openly about my mental health and my depression. And to the point of mentors, I recently picked up a mentor. I reached out to somebody that I had worked with, a director, and in our first conversation, I was able to say to this individual, Rob, look, I want to tell you that I struggle with depression. I've got some mental health challenges. That is part of who I am, and it helps me to be who I am, but sometimes it also inhibits me. And I think to the point of this whole podcast, if we can fight the stigma of so many other things, right? My oldest son has autism. When he was diagnosed more than 20 years ago, the stigma around autism was, they are cold, isolationist individuals. They have, there's nothing going on. All you can do is either medicate or give them intense therapy, and that's the only way to save them. We bucked the system on all of those, and now we're having discussions around, well, look, the autism is a spectrum, and there are some people on the autistic spectrum that if we just remove the things that they struggle with, they can do exemplary work. And I think that we'll mature as a society where we look at mental health and we say, look, there are some things that we can remove, and that when we remove those barriers, that we have more people that can contribute to the well-being of society. I mean, like I said, I'm very fortunate. Yechiel, you used a term earlier where you said from a position of privilege, and I think that I have often operated from that position of privilege when it comes to the immediate managers I've had.
So, just offering a point of perspective is that I still think that in IT, mental health, talking about mental health is a challenge. I don't want to diminish that or be Pollyanna about it. It's, there's a lot of people walking around in a lot of different companies or teams who know, not just suspect, but know that there's no way they can talk about it. And I think that especially in parts of the IT community that are already struggling with toxic masculinity and programmer culture, that's just not going to happen. However, I have seen enough discussions about burnout, about dealing with poor workplace habits or teams or processes. I've seen social media discussions tagged with the Fight the Stigma hashtag. I've seen enough of that to know that there is a shift taking place. This podcast, not the least among those things, that this is a conversation that more people are insisting that we have, to put it out in the open, to say this is a thing that happens. Again, Josh, just, in the same way that once upon a time people didn't dare talk about a child with autism. Now it's, I was talking to somebody the other day who was on a flight, and they were sitting next to, she works with exclusively with adults and kids with autism, and she was sitting on a flight next to somebody who was just coming with their child from having gotten a diagnosis. Wow. And without thinking, she says, "Oh my gosh, that's wonderful! That's so exciting!" Because in her perspective, working with these folks all day long, every day. They are joyful and fun and creative and interesting in ways that neurotypical people just aren't. And, she just, and she said, I actually had to check myself for a minute because I realized they had just gotten this diagnosis. They were just wrapping their head around it. And my unabashed enthusiasm was probably not taken the way that I meant it. So in that same way that they're, that reaction to families who have individuals with autism in it, I think that, the more we talk about it, the more that we bring it out there and talk about our individual experiences. I do also want to bring up something that I had seen a friend say earlier, which is that as much as we encourage people who may be dealing with depression or are struggling with, just emotions that they can't even quantify, and saying, if you're not sure what to do, get help. We acknowledge, or at least I acknowledge, that I may be adding fuel to the fire, because in those moments, movement, emotional or even physical movement, may be the hardest thing to do, and not being able to do that may feed into that depressive cycle that you're experiencing. So, get the help that you can. Be kind to yourself in the same way that you would be kind to anybody else in your world. Again, from our religious tradition, I think that we are taught, we are told, we are commanded to give the benefit of the doubt, to be kind to both our neighbors and and the strangers in our community. And yet that is the thing that we are most reluctant sometimes to give ourselves. So if it helps at all, treat yourself like a stranger. Treat, if you say, I don't even know who I am, okay, fair enough. Then get to know whoever that weirdo is looking at you in the mirror, and treat them with the kindness that you would treat anybody else who showed up at your doorstep in need.
My wife, she was a great example to me today. We have some friends who recently lost a child in a very traumatic way. A child, but he was an adult, a young adult, and it was difficult for my wife to talk with this other woman. She was obviously struggling with the scenario of life without this child who had this wonderfully infectious smile. He was just a joy to be around. He was very hyper, very, very hyper, but he always made people smile and always made people laugh. And as I watched my wife, the thing you don't want to say to somebody, and this is to your point, is, well, what can I do for you? Because the answer is, I don't know. I don't know how to help. And so my wife said, look, if you need someone to talk to, please call me. Or if you need someone to listen, please call me. Just know that I'm here. And I thought, boy, that is such a powerful thing. It's so simple, but as you said, Leon, we often are not willing to give of ourselves in that way. So to all of our listeners, be present for those among your coworkers in your community, whether it's IT or religious. I think that's powerful, right? I hope that our IT communities get better, get more authentic, and maybe less competitive. I think that'll do a lot for our mental health. Here's what I'll say. When I started my religious community, which I've wrapped up now that I'm in a different place, the tagline was, "You are not alone." So if nothing else today, I hope that our listeners will take that and remember, you are not alone. Life is a journey. Sometimes we pull off at a rest stop and we can rest. Other times we press on even when we should have pulled off to rest. Do not walk the journey alone. Your path looks different than my path, looks different than Yechiel's path or Leon's path, but we're all on this journey together. If you are struggling, if you need someone to talk to, reach out. Reach out to us via email. Our Twitter DMs are open, LinkedIn. Heck, you can even look me up in the phone book because Prince Edward Island still has a phone book.
It's crazy.
It's crazy, I know. But just remember, you're not alone. You're not alone, and people will be there for you.
Thanks for making time for us this week. To hear more of Technically Religious, visit our website, technicallyreligious.com, where you can find our other episodes, leave us ideas for future discussions, and connect us on social media.
At Technically Religious, we usually have something funny to say at this point in the show, but mental health is nothing to take lightly. If you are struggling, please reach out to a family member, friend, or a healthcare professional. If you are in crisis, please seek immediate medical attention. You are not alone. Fight the stigma.